Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rene Vargas Martinez, and I am a Senior Program Officer here at Inclusiv. And it is my privilege to welcome you to our second Juntos Avanzamos webinar of the year, ITIN Lending Programs, Tools for Financial Inclusion and Growth. Now, before we start, I would like to quickly go over the rules for today's webinar. First of all, this webinar is being recorded for future use and to distribute with those members of the Inclusiv Juntos Avanzamos network that were not able to make it today. Also, we really encourage you to take advantage of our panelists and ask as many questions as possible. You can ask your questions through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And of course, you can also comment through our chat. We will make sure that our panelists answer your question towards the end of the webinar. And lastly, I really want to thank today's panelists, Steve Pagenstecher from Point West Credit Union, Roberta Sumia Masud from Marine Credit Union, and Invi Bustillo from Latino Community Credit Union for sharing their experience and wisdom with our network. And now, without further ado, I will present you to Pablo De Filippi, our Senior Vice President of Membership and Network Engagement, which will start this webinar. Thank you. Pablo, adelante. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Thank you, Rene. Hello, everyone. We're really excited about having this conversation today. This is one of the hottest topics in our industry. It's incredible how much awareness there is now around ITIN lending and really serving everyone in the community. So we are really excited about this conversation and hopefully, provoking some ideas and some action on your part so we can increase our impact in communities. We have an amazing panel here with people who have been doing this work for a long time. So take advantage of this expertise and please participate. So let's move on really quickly. We're going to start with a quick update of the Juntos, first of Inclusiv and the CDF5 expertise that we bring to the table. As you know, Inclusiv is on itself a CDF5. We have been the CDF5 expert for the credit industry for a long time. In fact, we were one of the organizations that helped establish the CDFI Fund back to the mid-90s. We also helped establish the low-income designation. Those are two of the main building blocks of community finance. Many of you on this call are probably both. You may also be an MDI, a minority depository institution. So all these things are important blocks, that can help you serve your community. So let's move on to the next one, Rene. So in terms of our expertise, well, our network here, we have, I'm happy to report that we're approaching almost 400 members in the Inclusiv network. This has been an incredible time, challenging times in many ways for everyone, for the nation, for our industry, for our movement. At the same time, it's been a moment of opportunity where we have seen incredible responses from credit unions that have supported their communities, their members. We have a huge participation in the Paycheck Protection Program. There's a lot of interest on CDFI certification. So our network is growing because of that, because of the opportunities available, and because of all this incredible impact that our industry is making in communities across the country. In terms of the Juntos Avanzamos network, I'm also happy to report that the network is growing strong. We are over 112 credit unions at this point. We have a pipeline of applications we're reviewing. So this is exciting because it reveals that all this work, all this education around the opportunity that the Hispanic market represents for our industry is sinking in, and we see a lot of activity, credit unions coming to the table to participate, to serve. We're serving more than 8 million consumers. The Juntos Avanzamos credentials have a presence in 27 states, DC and Puerto Rico. So this is really a growing network, and we're so happy and grateful actually to all of you for the work that you do for our communities, for our paisanos, and for our fellow citizens. So quickly, we're going to recognize our newest Juntos Avanzamos designated credentials. We have an amazing diversity, as you can see. We're celebrating Members First Credit Union in Utah, Fox Valley Credit Union in Illinois, and Community Choice Credit Union in Colorado. So you can see that Hispanics, Latinos were everywhere. Also, a quick announcement here, we are going to be celebrating the Juntos Avanzamos designation of Express Credit Union in Washington State, Seattle to be exact, on June 15. This is going to be a virtual ceremony. Hopefully you guys can participate. We'll be sending more information to the network in the following weeks. Lastly, Financial Education Week, la Semana de Educación Financiera that the Mexican Consulate organizes every year. Is scheduled from June 14th to 21st. Amazing opportunity for Juntos Avanzamos credit unions to participate, to reach out to their local consulates and develop a relationship there. So reach out to us if you need more information, that you can just reach out directly to your Mexican consulate and ask them how you can participate. And finally, CDF5 update. I'm sure that everyone is a little bit tired of all this information, but this is the year of CDF5s. There's a lot of resources available, 12 billion to be exact. Some of that money has already been allocated. 1.3 billion actually came out through the Rapid Response Program. We're expecting an announcement pretty soon about grants amounts and who received those resources. Let's move on really quickly to the next one. In total this year, the CDFI Fund is going to deploy 3.5 billion. Yes, $billion. This is an incredible amount of money. Just to put this in context, since 1996, the CDFI Fund, oops, I made a mistake. Since 1996, the CDFI Fund has deployed 3.5 billion. This year alone, they're going to deploy 3.4 billion in grants. So this is, an incredible scaled up of the fund and the ways that they are supporting CDF5s across the country. Participate if you're a CDF5. If you're not, look for, become a CDF5. We can provide resources and support for that process. We're hoping that moving forward, the CDF5 Fund is going to have allocations of 1 billion as their budget. That's one of our points in our advocacy platform. We've been talking to our partners in the industry to make sure that we are emphasizing that. We are hearing from Congress that they're looking at least $500 million for next year. We're hoping that that will become actually 1 billion in resources. So this is not something that's going to end this year. So please, take action. Explore if you are eligible for CDF5 certification. If you are a CDF5, participate. This is important for us to come to the table and take advantage of these opportunities. So what's left right now, we have, for those that are CDF5s and low income designated, there's, still 9 billion in secondary capital investments that the Treasury opened up a couple of months ago. There's still a lot of questions with that program. We're waiting for some Q&As, some FAQs, final FAQs to come out hopefully next week. We're going to do a deep dive into this program at our town hall call on June 8th. And then, of course, we're still waiting for announcements around the MDI funding. That's basically 1.2 billion that the CDFI Fund is going to make available sometime in the last quarter of this year. And with that, let's move on to our lending program panel. Wow, that was a lot. Okay, so let's move on really quickly. We have Irving Bustillo, VP of Lending at Cooperativa Latina Credit Union, who's going to be sharing his experience. We also have, or should I just, this is the moment, Rene, where everyone just goes on the 5 minutes? Okay, so before I introduce the rest of this of the panelists, I'm going to ask Irving to spend a few minutes just talking about his experience in the ITIN lending environment.
Thank you, Paulo. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to talk about some underwriting considerations in our credit union to share the experience that we have in that field. First and foremost, we need to stress that we evaluate members in our credit union that has social security numbers or ITIN the same way, exactly the same way. They have the access to the same products, same rates, same fees. So that is important to know, first of all. Second, we evaluate in this moment every single credit with our loan officers. We don't have automated decision systems. So that is very helpful for our members, because when you hear them face to face or by the phone, they can give you all the information you need to make a decision. We have bilingual Spanish and English loan officers. And it's not only the language, it's the cultural empathy that you transmit. You can understand the reality of those persons that are in front of you or on the phone. We use alternative credit history, such as utility bills, water, sewage, garbage, electricity, cable, you name it, TV, etc. And we use verification of rent as well. So one person, we make mortgages, and a person never had a single credit card, for example, but we based our decision in the behavior of the rent of the utilities. And that helps a lot to our members. Down payment, that is important as well for cars or for mortgages. We require at least 5% in a car loan, or could be 5% in a mortgage, or 10% in order to approve a loan. And we accept alternative forms of ID, such as passports, consular IDs. And we have the opportunity to verify those IDs with the ID International checking guide. So we make sure that all these IDs are real. Of course, we use the credit score as one of the elements of the decision, but not the only one. For example, sometimes members have medical collections, apartment collections, cable collections. That is very common. But we understand that situation, and we work together with our member to solve those problems and go ahead with the loan. We use diverse sources of income, for example, bank statements for people who is self-employed, for a car loan, for a credit card, for a personal loan, and sometimes state income based on the experience of the member. One of the most important things that I want to share with you guys is that our loan officers invest time to help the members to get the proper documentation. Sometimes the member can't have access to the tax return transcripts, account transcripts that they need for a mortgage loan. We help them to get those documents. We can go with them to call a collections agency to help them to pay one collection of, I don't know, $50, $100 that they have in their credit history. That takes time. Could be 5 minutes on the phone, 10 minutes on the phone, but we need to understand that we have to help them to solve those problems. And that improves the credit score and the credit history of our members. Of course, we have some challenges. Since we don't use only the credit history, the traditional credit history to make our decisions, we need to invest time to get some alternative documents such as verifications of rent, verifications of employment, not only from the member, but from third parties like the employers, like the landlords. Sometimes you have barriers with the landlords that they don't want to share a verification of rent of one of their tenants. Sometimes this process can take 1 week, 2 weeks, even up to 1 month to get those documents, but we have to be patient. Another challenge is the difficulty that some of our members have with the use of technology, to scan documents, to share documents through internet, or simply to e-sign a document. Manual evaluation involves more time from our loan officers as well for the underwriter process. And one of the challenges that we see for the foreseeable future is to get enough qualified loan officers according to our internal culture. They have to be bilingual, Spanish, English, and that will be a challenge for our future. And the last one that we see is that we have to pull the credit report to know more about the member, because normally they have 2 names and 2 last names. So we can get all the history in the first time we pull the credit report. We need to send some inquiries to the Equifax to get 1, 2, 3, 4 combinations of names. That involves time. So that is the information that I want to share with you in this first part of the panel. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have in the next minutes.
Irving, really quickly, before we move on to the next panelist, can you speak to your overall portfolio? How big is it? How many loans? I mean, to the extent that you can share that information.
Yeah, this is public information. We have more than $500 million in loans. And we granted more than $1 billion in the credit union, in our credit union history. So you can have an idea of how successful has been this program.
Perfect, thank you. And when you say loans, you're talking about ITIN loans, right?
In general, loans and social security loans, because we don't make any differentiation in our portfolio, but we make a lot of
Okay.
loans with ITIN.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, so just for everyone, we are taking note of your questions, and we are going to ask those questions to the panelists once we go through this first round of presentations. So Steve, now it's your turn.
Awesome. Thank you, Pablo. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Hagenstecker with Point West Credit Union. We're in Portland, Oregon, about 100 million in assets, and we've been doing ITIN lending since 2008. I'll keep it really short because I want to make sure that there's time for questions. I think the things that I would add are making the decision to do ITIN lending is a simple one, right? It's a yes or no. But how you get to that answer and the work that goes into it is far more complicated, right? And so I would say it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. For those of us who have been doing it for a long time, there's a lot of things. And Irving talked a little bit about it. I think there's the cultural considerations, right? Do you have staff that's bilingual, bicultural to serve the community you're trying to reach? But also there's does your underwriting practices match the criteria needed to serve that community well, right? Do you have a good program? Because a lot of times, if you're relying on regular credit bureau data, you're not going to get data back. And in those cases, do you have a program that supports, no credit borrowers, or do you use alternative credit, like Irving said? And then also there's the examination compliance side of this, right? Being here in the Northwest, we don't have examiners that are terribly comfortable or understand ITIN lending. And so there's a lot of education that goes into that, a lot of showing our homework to show that we're managing for the risk. And those things have to be in place. But I agree with Irving 100%, which is, I think everyone needs to start their ITIN journey somewhere, right? We started with unsecured loans, but I think the goal should always be, how do you offer all your products and services at the same rates and terms to all borrowers, regardless of their citizenship status? And that's what we do at Point West as well. So we offer everything from unsecured credit cards, vehicle loans, all the way up to home equities and first mortgages. So I'll stop there, but I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of aspects to this. It can't just be an and, it has to be integrated into your organization and be part of who you are if it's going to be successful.
Great. Steve, you participated, actually, Point West was one of the first credit unions that participated in this ITIN guide, where Inclusiv, Coopera, and Filene came together. Just looking back, how do you feel about the impact that you're making in your community? I assume that your portfolio on the ITIN side has grown significantly since then, right?
It has, yeah. And in fact, through the pandemic, it was one of the only parts of our portfolio that continued to grow. So we have about $13 million in ITIN loans, about 1,500 borrowers. And again, we're small, right? 100 million in assets, about 11,000 members. So it makes up more than 20% of our portfolio. And I think we're always holding a mirror up to ourselves and saying, are we doing enough, or can we do better? We know our practices aren't perfect. We know that there's borrowers we're leaving out. And so it's just constantly sharpening the pencil and trying to make a better process to ensure that we're being, as inclusive and equitable in how we're providing those loans as possible.
And thank you. And I love that comment about ITIN, your ITIN portfolio being like the only part of your portfolio that grew last year. This really tells us a lot about the need out there, but also the opportunity. And I think that that's where we want to get here, is to get more credit unions to understand that this is a market that can be served in a way that is responsible to the consumer, and at the same time sustainable to the institution. These are not mutually exclusive goals. They can go together. And with that, let's move on to Roberta. Roberta, your mic. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not technologically inclined. My talent is getting these ITIN loans done.
Yay.
So on the same vein that Steve had spoken to, the ITIN program that we have is exactly the rates, the terms, everything is exactly the same as the rest of our members. There's no, additional fee or rate or anything like that because of the fact that it's an ITIN loan. The way we approach this is we started out with wanting a mortgage program. So that's what we began with first. And then once we got it up live and running, we also included the auto loans, et cetera. So right now we are 5 years in, and we hold a portfolio of 28 million in ITIN loans. It's about 800 clients. And out of those 800, 250 of them are homeowners. And there'll be another 4 closing tomorrow, I know, because I'm doing the closings.
Wow.
So it's been a very, a wonderful program for the community. My credit union is a little bit unique because we strictly serve the underserved. We don't have any type of government funding. We don't do FHA loans, VA loans, anything like that. We strictly do loans that can't get done in the secondary market. So this was definitely a footprint we needed to be in.
And Roberta, can you speak about, your credit union? Where are you guys located? Who you serve?
Sure.
Yes.
We are in, I myself am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we actually have a footprint all across Wisconsin, Rock County, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota as well.
And how big are you guys?
Well, I feel we're relatively small. We're 400 employees all across the entire enterprise.
It's funny, the definition of small varies.
Well, I came from big banking, so to me, it's a small. It's small.
Yes, yes. Totally get that. Any other comments, Roberta?
Yeah, in regards to the delinquency, I did see some questions regarding that. I think everybody should know that the delinquency on this particular part of what we offer is less than half of the non-ITIN sector. So it's a very well-performing portfolio, which is why I think we were able to get it going here with us, because we came in prepared saying, we want ITIN, and this is what it looks like in other areas.
So we have already two, common threads here. One, there's demand even in times of crisis. And secondly, these are high-performing loans, lower delinquency. And I assume that that's the same for the three panelists experience?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
Great. So the goal of this conversation today was to answer questions, because we're getting so many questions all the time. So we decided to just have this, experts here present. So we have like a bunch of lists of questions already. Rene, should we go through those lists before we ask some more questions to the panelists?
Yeah, sure. I think that we can do that. So let's go ahead and start with, we have some of the questions have already been answered on the chat. But for example, we have a question from Matt Ellison. And I think it might have been answered, but just to make sure, do you treat these members as a typical member without credit when determining their rate, or do they get a unique rate structure? That's pretty much for every panelist.
For Marine Credit Union, no, all customers walking in the door are treated the same. So if their credit warrants this interest rate, that's what they're getting. Same thing with a non-ITIN borrower. If they're coming in with no credit whatsoever, that's the rate they're getting. So we don't alter our rates or fees or anything like that simply because it's an ITIN product.
So the rate, just to be clear, Roberta, the rates in your case are driven by credit scores.
Yes, sir. And we will use the credit score that shows up on the credit report, even if the credit score was, created with an alternative social security number. We will use that credit score, but we still take that into consideration and collect the alternative documents also.
In our case, we don't base our rates or fees in credit score. We base it, for example, in mortgages, depending on how much you pay of down payment, depending on the term of the loan. If it's a higher term, high rate, shorter term, lower rate. But credit score is only a part of the decision.
Well, that's also with us as well. If they're putting down a larger down payment, then they're going to have a slightly lower credit score. But again, that's same all the way across the panel, ITIN or non-ITIN. Everybody is treated the same.
And I don't know if it's the same in every part of the country, because obviously it's not. But I would, in our neck of the woods, 60% of our ITIN borrowers have credit scores. So it's not, I think there's a perception that, if they're ITIN, they're not going to have any credit score whatsoever. And that's not true.
Correct.
And there was a question I saw earlier related to that regarding, is ITIN accepted by the credit bureaus? That's a constantly evolving thing, but the short answer is no. They say it's not a unique identifier and therefore not something to use, but that's just one aspect of a credit report, right? They're looking at address and employment and name and birth date. And so people with ITINs can absolutely build credit. And I think those two things get mixed up a lot, that credit bureaus don't accept ITIN, so therefore ITIN borrowers can't build credit. And those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. And I think that there's also confusion in the way that the different credit bureaus treat this information. Equifax, or Experian treat it differently. And sometimes, they accept it. They track lending data as part of the report. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes it goes back and forth between the different credit bureaus. So we've heard, from Juntos Avanzamos Credit that sometimes one credit bureau may be more receptive to providing information than others, and then it switches, right? So there's a little bit of lack of consistency in the way that this information is treated and recorded.
All right, excellent. So we have another question. The chat is burning up from Cecilia Rocha, and this is pretty much a verification of income question. And the question is, do you compare the cash income with the amount that was reported on taxes?
For us, we will, if we have a self-employed borrower, which we do have often, and we definitely review the taxes. We also order copies of the tax transcripts, but I will also review all of the deposits they've made into their business and personal bank accounts. And those are not really considered income, but they are considered an extenuating factor in order to get the approval. So we can say, yes, this is what they're claiming. However, this is what they're depositing, and work between those two averages.
Irving, Steve?
Very similar for us. I mean, we will always want to look at the tax returns if we have a self-employed borrower, but there always are, we operate in the gray. You got to find a solution for the borrower, and if they have a ton of money that they're sitting on, then you can use that as another factor.
All right. So moving on to the next question. The question is from Richelle Ray. And the question is, how do you handle auto loans for members who do not have a driver's license? Do you lend to those without a driver's license?
Yeah, you couldn't get driver's licenses in Oregon until January if you were a non-citizen. So we're not the DMV. That's kind of our philosophy is, we don't check to see if citizen borrowers have driver's licenses either, and they may or may not, right? That's not our job. They do have to have it insured, and typically you have to have some form of valid ID for driving to get insured. So that's, but we don't check. Sorry, Roberta, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem. The same thing here. On our ITIN loans, what we accept as a valid ID is we won't accept the city ID. It's not valid for banking, but we will take a valid passport and a valid government ID, like a matricula or something like that. We don't ask for a driver's license. We already know what's up.
Same. We don't require a driver license in order to brand a car loan.
Excellent. So moving on to another question in the chat. How has the NCUA and other regulators handled your ITIN mortgage programs?
I'm not on that side of the paperwork, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Yes.
Don't have any problem with the ITIN mortgage program. They never made a comment about that.
I would say we don't really have any large concerns either. It just comes down to, are you following your policies? Do you have established procedures? Do you have good documentation? It's just like any other loan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this is something that NCUA has, has issued some opinions about. ITIN Lending has been around for a long time. This is nothing new. Let's be clear about that. We're talking more about it now than before, but it's been around for at least 2 decades at this point, or maybe even before that. Maybe it wasn't that name. So there's a precedent within NCUA. Again, as Steve said, it's more about documentation, but I would add that it's also about how you handle your regulator, because you have to demonstrate competency on what you're doing, right? You know this market, you understand the market, and that allows you to mitigate the perceived risk, because clearly when we're talking about delinquency, if it's overperforming other type of loans, it shouldn't be an issue. But if the regulator still challenges you, it's because then you have to make that case, right? I know this community, this is what we've done to establish that trust, and we can rely on the documentation that has been provided to us.
If I may, I'd like to go back to the credit reports because Marine Credit Union does report these loans. And I can tell you from doing refinances, they do show up on a credit report. We use TransUnion.
Okay.
That's the only one that we view. So I'm not quite sure if they're on the other ones. But I mean, you got to keep in mind, a credit bureau report is just like anything else. It's a compilation of facts. So you get the customer's name, address, birth date, et cetera, correct, then that other information is going to fall in onto their credit report. So I have in the past had customers that walked in here with no credit, and I had a relationship with a bank that I would immediately send them over to, and they would set up a secured credit card. And then by the time they're coming back ready to buy, all of a sudden they've got a they have a credit score. So it is a way to help build credit. It just depends really on what credit reports are you taking into factor.
Yeah.
All right, and questions keep rolling in, and we have two questions here. I'm alternating from the chat and the Q&A. So we have two questions here for Roberta. And the first one is, what are the majority factors that make your borrowers non-eligible for secondary? And the second one is pretty much a question about down payment with Marine.
So with Marine, we required 10% down as long as it's an owner-occupied home. We ask for 20% if it's going to be a condo, simply because that's a riskier product. We ask for 20% if it's going to be an investment property. But most of my loans are done with 10% down, and that's all the way up to a 4-unit building, as long as it's being owner-occupied.
Excellent. All right, and so moving on to the chat, we already talked, this is a question from Caroline Ball. What documentation are you using to verify identity? We already talked about passports, matrícula consular, and some IDs from states, depending on how good they are. And this is more again with the cash. What is used to verify income when they get paid in cash?
We don't have a lot of those paid in cash because we require that we require 2 years of taxes.
In our case, for example, we can make a loan based on the bank statements for consumer loans only, not for mortgages. For mortgages, we require 2 years of taxes for self-employees, but for consumer loans such as auto credit cards, we can make it with 6 months of bank statements.
So the bank statement would suffice as a proof of income, right?
Correct. And of course, we ask the member about the expenses of his or her business activity that have to be reasonable.
All right. Okay, moving on to the next question from Claire Hendricks. And I guess this would be for pretty much everyone. What have been your challenges in implementing ITIN mortgages into your lending portfolio? Is the main barrier just limited volume due to not having a secondary market for the loans?
Honestly, a lot of my volume is word of mouth and referrals. Other lending institutions, realtors, the customer walks in and says, I have an ITIN. We're pretty flexible on getting these deals done. The one thing that's a hard stop for us is if they're working in somebody else's name, then we can't proceed. That's really our only hard stop.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Irving.
Go ahead, Irving.
Same as Roberta, we have plenty of demand of ITIN mortgages. So our problem is how to process all this queue of mortgages. We have very good word of mouth out there. So this is after 10, 15 years working with the community. So they trust us.
So in terms of like the secondary market question, there's no secondary market for ITIN loans. Inclusiv has a secondary market for our members. So if for some on the call, the issue is that you have your own limits just for, portfolio management issues, we can buy those loans. We do that through our CDCU Mortgage Center. So ITIN loans is something that we definitely can buy from you all.
Excellent. So moving on to the next question in the chat. What type of loans ITIN holders request? What are they pursuing, doing with the money? I'm guessing, like, in this case, like, what is the most that they request? Would you say you have most movement on?
Vehicle for us.
For us, mortgages and vehicles.
Well, I only deal with the mortgage side, but we have more vehicle loans than we do mortgages.
All right. Next question from Matt Ellison. The question is, what struggles have you had to manage when helping a member who obtains an SSN after lending with an ITIN? It's a good question.
No.
I've only had a few. And I would simply, refer them over to a program that's going to get them better. A better rate, a better program, whatever, using the Social Security number. But keep in mind, they still need to establish credit under that Social Security number now.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily translate, but it can over time. I mean, it's really, from our perspective at Point West, it's good for them, and what else can we do, right? It's not there's no complications.
All right.
When our members can get a better, any of our members, they can get something a little bit better than we're able to provide for them. We celebrate that. We're happy. Yeah. We're here to just get them, up to financial security. We're here to better their lives. We're not trying to hold anybody into our loans.
No.
And in the last year, we realized that it doesn't matter if you have a Social Security, you are going to the lender that gives you the better rate, better deal. How many refinances are in the market in the last year? Tons.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. This one is in the chat. This one is, can you expand more about when the credit score generated or credit score generation using alternative Social Security number? I'm guessing ITIN in this case. I think we went a bit over about that, so that it is still reported to the credit bureaus. I don't know if you want to add anything else about reporting to the credit unions, credit bureaus, or how your experience about that.
I mean, it's partially a BSA thing, right? You pull credit, you get different tax IDs back, and are these who this person says they are, right? If we have a person with an ITIN and we pull credit and there's other socials on there, we don't care as long as we can validate the ITIN. So we ask for a copy of the IRS letter showing their ITIN, and then we don't care past that. We had a state examiner years ago that said every time that came up, we had to file a SAR, and we were like, that's insanity. And finally had a really good BSA auditor was like, so you're saying you want to do business with them, but you don't think that what they're doing is legal, but you're going to take their money anyways, right? And so we were lucky to push back against the state and change that. So as long as they say that, we can document who they are, we don't care what else is on the credit report.
Excellent. All right, moving on to the next question. This is from Esther Mata Ririk, and the question is, are there specific documents required to validate the ITIN, like the CP565 form and tax returns, to show that they can keep their ITIN status? Do you require POI on all loans?
One of the forms that we initially have them fill out is the W-9 or W-8, and we do check to make sure that those are valid numbers still. We also have them do a 4506T to obtain the tax transcripts. Those are two things that we do verify.
We can use the tax returns to verify the ITIN number as well.
We just use a copy of the letter. We're not the IRS, so we don't have to, we don't validate if they need to file W-8, it's on them. They should know that. We don't do anything with it.
All right. Next questions. Next question is, there are some questions here about, if any of the panelists would be willing to share their underwriting guidelines.
You're not going to find a lot in ours that are specific
Yeah.
to ITIN. It's just
Right.
underwriting guidelines.
I'll share with anybody that's not in Wisconsin.
Or Iowa or Minnesota or what else? You are in like 4 states, right?
Right. Okay, excellent. So, and we have yet another question, is there about delinquency, panelists have already explained that the delinquency that they see in their ITIN loan portfolios is low. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about delinquency, or maybe, there's a lot of questions about this for a reason. I'm guessing, I don't know if you'd like to talk a bit about that.
I think that if you're going to do ITIN loans, you need to understand the culture that you're dealing with. Because when I take an ITIN application, I have one of the biggest offices in the company because I usually have grandma, grandpa, uncles, couple kids. I got the whole family coming in to talk about this loan because this whole family is contributing to this loan. So, the fact that they're able to provide a home for their large families to live comfortably, to, we're not worried about delinquency because if Papa's not working, his 2 boys are. And having that mortgage paid and having that nice home for their family is top of a priority list. So I think in order to do an ITIN loan, you really have to wrap your head around the culture and be understanding of that first.
In our case, we have 99.8 repayment rate. So it's very natural for us to make a ITIN loan. We don't have any difference with people that have a social security. So in terms of delinquency, you don't have to worry about it. We have been doing this for 20 years. So, and we have great portfolio.
And this gets tricky, but where does that fear come from, right? Where does your perception that higher delinquency is going to be, because a lot of it's steeped in, I get questions still all the time about like, well, what happens if they leave the country? It's like, what happens if someone goes to jail or someone else leaves the country, right? Like, there's a lot of what ifs out there. But if someone's going through all this effort to become a member, to provide all the documentation, to get a loan, like, it's a narrative steeped in some misunderstanding of your member in your community, right? And so it really comes down to, if you feel like you have strong underwriting guidelines and those guidelines are meeting the needs of the community and you're able to close loans for them, then you shouldn't see higher delinquency. And back to Roberta's point too, are you an organization that they connect with, that they feel understands them and supports them and is part of who their community is as well? Like, if you have really good people who work with your members and understand both the cultural and language considerations that may be at play, then you're probably going to have really good return. Members are going to continue to want to pay you because they recognize that you're doing a good thing for them.
I think it comes with building the relationship from day one, because I know if my member has an issue, if there's going to be something happening on the mortgage, I had an issue where the father was deported. I mean, the family came immediately to me. What do we do?
Yeah.
So you have to have that relationship, and it's a lot more handholdy than a traditional loan, but it's so much more rewarding. I mean, you build a bond with these people. I have customers that come in and bring me mail and ask me to help them understand what this mail is. And usually it's right after a loan's closed, and you know how everybody gets all those solicitations. They're like, Mrs. Roberta, what's this? Garbage? This is garbage, and this is garbage. So it's more about relationship building. I think that's number one.
The other thing is that I want to share every day in my desk, I see beautiful 800 and above scores from people that have that only have an ITIN. It's not a difference with the people that only have Social Security. A lot of 760s.
Yeah.
So they have great credit. And if you believe in the credit score, believe me, they will pay you no matter where they are.
So this perceived risk really, it's more than anything, not really understanding this market more than anything else.
Mhm.
So the way that you address it is by building those relationships, right? It's all about relationship building and having that trust with the community. But it's a good point to emphasize that serving this market is not inherently riskier than serving other markets.
Right.
We all agree on that, right?
Right.
All right. Excellent. So moving to the next question. Do any of your, this is from anonymous attendee, and the question is, do any of your programs ask for residency status / info on the underwriting process, i.e. how long they are currently authorized for residency?
We don't ask.
We don't.
No, and you don't have to have residency to have an ITIN. So, government they want their tax money regardless of whether or not you're here legally or not. And again,
Excellent.
once again, we're not the IRS, right?
So let's really examine this, because I think that it comes out a lot where we feel that we have an obligation to do some things that we don't really have to do. NCUA doesn't require that you have a social security number to open an account. You can actually open an account without a social security number, without an ITIN. So let's be clear about that. This is all about internal policies and internal interpretations of regulations, right? So there's nothing in the regs that tells you that you have to verify someone's citizenship status, for instance. We are financial institutions. We're not ICE. We're not immigration services, right? And our obligation, our duty is actually to make sure that that person is who she or he says they are, right? That's really where we start.
Correct.
So with that proven, we can move forward, and hopefully we can make our products and services available to everyone who comes through the door, right? I mean, the fact that they're coming through the door is already something to celebrate.
Yeah. And you can, if the person doesn't have any credit history and want a credit card, for example, you will not grant a $15,000 credit card. You can start with a secure credit card of $500. So they are building credit. In 1 year, you can grant a $1,000 credit card without a secure deposit. So you are knowing your member in that time.
Excellent. All right, so we have a bunch of questions pending, so I'll try to move as fast as possible. This is interesting. Are there any grants for credit unions that provide ITIN lending that you know of? That's from Marilu Garcia.
So yes and no. I think that at the federal level, it's a tricky question to ask. At the state or local level or private sector level, there's plenty of opportunities. There's many foundations and also local governments that have a strong interest in facilitating integration of immigrants into local economies. It's a public safety issue to begin with. So there are resources, at the local level that you could seek, but not at the federal level that I know of.
So for us, we don't have any, but if the customer comes in with some, like I've had customers who came in with grants from their jobs, I mean, we'll use whatever they can bring to us. The biggest problem we have trying to get anything else is, one, we don't use federal money. So.
Excellent. Okay, so moving on to the next one. On mortgages, if only 10% as down payment is asked, what about PMI? This is for you, Roberta.
We don't have PMI.
We don't
We
have
don't charge
PMI.
PMI.
We don't have PMI neither.
All right, next
So
question.
can we
Fred,
stop there because
what
this
is
is really
PMI?
good, right? PMI. I mean, what is the typical normal thing to do is that you require actually a PMI when you go above 80%, right? In this case, none of these three lenders require it for this specific product. So that says something about the quality of the borrowers and also of the performance of the portfolio, right?
We have 0 foreclosures. 0.
Okay, can you say that again?
0.
All right. Okay, moving on. Have you seen additional requests for service increase as your ITIN portfolio has increased? Remittance services, et cetera.
It's a chicken and the egg kind of thing, I think, right? Like, you know, are you an organization that's already providing services that's meeting the needs of your membership? Which, if that includes an ITIN, you know, ITIN holders, maybe that is something that's important, right? Like, I think it's just, that's more of a, are you getting relatively good feedback from your membership and are you meeting their needs from a service perspective? So those things can change over time. I don't feel like it's any different than any, you know, we take feedback from our members, and if there's services that we need to add because there's a growing need for it, we'll add it. I can't think of anything specific that it's like, oh, we started doing ITIN lending and this changed our services.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Steve. Next question. How do you handle a situation when a member is granted a loan with an ITIN, then 6 months later, they apply for a new loan with an invalid social? Has that even happened to you? Is it something that you see?
I've
No.
never seen it.
I mean, if it did, we'd just be like, are you sure? And they'd be like, oh yeah, I have an ITIN, and then we just move on. I think. I mean, it's never come up before.
When you have an ITIN and you are issued a Social Security, you're told, you're immediately said, stop. You get a letter saying you're no longer allowed to use this ITIN number. So they're bringing me either an ITIN letter or I'm having a valid social, period.
That's correct.
Right.
And when they get the Social Security, just have to update the member profile,
Mm-hmm.
new identification. That's it.
All right, another question. We're trying to take as much of that we can. What is your policy for when an ITIN borrower brings in their own translator? Any legal concerns around informal translators?
Well, I'm going to tell you guys right now, I created this program and I've been working it for 6 years and I don't speak fluent Spanish. So I tell them, bring in anybody you feel you can trust and we'll sit here for 3 hours if we have to. The only hard stop I have is I require that my loans are closed by a Spanish speaking title agent. I'm not going to trust their translator to translate those documents because they simply might not understand what the terminology is. So I work with a title company that provides that.
60% of our staff is bilingual, so we typically would have a staff member present that's,
In our case,
we wouldn't have
100
staff translate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In our case, 100% of our staff is bilingual, so there's no problem with that.
All
And by
right.
the way, Steve is taking Spanish classes, right, Stevie?
That's right. Been doing it all my life, and it's
All right, next question. Do you use a system to verify a person's ID if they're using alternative identification? If so, which system do you use?
In our case, what we use is a book. The name is ID International Checking Guide. It's available in the market. You can buy it and you can compare, you know, driver license from many countries around the world, passports, etc. So there is a solution in the market for that.
and it is just a book. There's no like online version of it or anything, but they do update it annually typically.
Mm-hmm.
We
All right.
don't use anything. We don't use anything for verification, just the passport and matriculas. And I've seen enough of them now. I know what they are by feel.
Yeah, every once in a while we'll get a weird passport or a matricular card that we're just not used to, and so it's nice to be able to go back and verify, like because it'll tell you all the different security features and stuff. But it's rare that it ever comes up.
Right.
The thing that helps is that a lot of our employees, including me, come from Latin American countries, so we know the identifications of our countries. We can ask one coworker, hey, you know this ID? Yeah, it's valid. That helps.
All right. Another question. Do you do, I'm guessing, ITIN business loans?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We do not.
We don't. Only for self-employees.
No, we don't do commercial lending at all. We only do micro enterprise, so up to 50,000. Keeps us off the radar of the examiners, and frankly, the vast majority of businesses that we work with don't have larger capital needs. So, but it doesn't matter to us if you're a citizen or not. If they have an ITIN and they want to apply for a business loan and they meet the requirements, they can get a business loan.
All right. Another question here. Do you worry about the expiration of the ITIN?
No.
No.
As long as it's valid when we're closing, we're good.
I mean, we don't ask for updated driver's licenses every time someone's, I mean, if their driver's license is expired, we'd ask for it, right? It's just, yeah.
Same
We
principle.
validated who they were at the time.
All right, moving on. A question from Diana Cervantes from America. Very good conversation. Is your application and loan, or are your application and loan documents in Spanish?
Ours are not. I am fighting hard to get that. So they will be soon because I have kind of a big mouth, but we don't have them yet, but that's why we use a Hispanic speaking title agent. And believe me, they go through them line by line by line. You're talking 2-hour closings sometimes.
We only have an English.
Excellent. And we keep getting questions about these ITIN SSN. Could one of you just generally say what you do? Like, if somebody comes with an ITIN and then they get an SSN, we update to the SSN in our system.
Yep. And then that'll start them reporting. So our same loan will start reporting under their social security number.
Mhm.
Excellent. All right. Any additional comment about that?
I will tell you that years ago when I worked in Chicago, when I had loans that were with Hispanic members, I had actually created a whiteboard, or it was like a laminated sheet. Now, keep in mind, I've been doing this 30 years, so don't laugh. But it was a laminated sheet that I could actually go in and fill in their rates and their terms and things like that. And I would do that and give that to them while we were going over the documents. So they were at least able to follow along. But I am, of course, asking for something more professional here.
Excellent. All right. And we have other questions that we've answered. Let me see here in the chat. There's a lot of questions about PMI. All of our panelists say that they don't use PMI for these kinds of loans. There are other questions about secondary market for mortgages. For ITIN mortgages, Inclusiv, Paulo said that Inclusiv we do provide a secondary market for ITIN mortgages for our affiliated members. There's also, again, the question about, if you're concerned that somebody with an ITIN will be staying long enough to pay. Our panelists said that they've never had any issues with that, that their ITIN portfolio delinquencies are lower. They don't do any foreclosures on them, so that is not a concern. And we discussed a bit why that question comes along so much. And then another question, this is good. I think it's good for closing. Do you have underwriting programs, traditional lending versus ITIN? Do you have two lending policies? This is a great question.
No.
We do not.
Okay, let's just be clear about this, because we're not, when we say ITIN lending, is not that we're creating a whole new product. This is basically replicating or expanding what we have already, the same criteria, right, to non-citizen members. So this is not, and I think that that's part of the confusion sometimes, and where we get stuck here is that we're thinking, oh my God, I have to create something from the ground up. It's not that, it's expanding what we have, is making it more inclusive, right?
Right, there's another question here. Can you share your ITIN auto loan experience securing the loan, title perfection? Is it any different? Is it the same?
No different.
In our case, we have the figure of the other owner that has a driver license. So if the borrower does not have a driver license, they can get support from a relative or a close friend with a driver license, and there's no problem with the DMV to register the auto.
It's never been an issue. And like I said, in Oregon, you couldn't get a driver's license as an ITIN holder until January of this year. So never been an issue otherwise.
Mhm.
I'm not on the auto side, so unfortunately I can't really answer that, but I do know in Wisconsin, you cannot get a driver's license as an ITIN holder.
Yep.
The same, another question about documentation. If you require any additional documentation from ITIN borrowers than non-ITIN borrowers.
Exactly the same.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't require anything additional, but the things that we've made an exception on, for example, a verification of rental letter, we'll accept a handwritten letter even if it's in Spanish, as long as it includes all the pertinent things that we need.
Excellent. We have another question. This is interesting. How do you track your ITIN loans?
They start with a 9. That's the easiest way. The tax ID for the borrower is going to be start with a 9 because all ITINs start with a 9. So
Yep. He is correct.
All right. So I think that there's another question again about small business loans to ITIN members. Yes, some of the credit unions here do. Actually, Point West, right, offer business loans, and we know of other credit unions that offer business loans as well for ITIN holders. And the same thing, you know, same policies, same requirements, same pricing. And I think that we have actually cleared the chat and the Q&A. Congratulations to our panelists. Oh, this is a good question. And I know I'm taking a bit of more time, and then, you know, with that, we'll have to close. So we have the question, do you have any recommendations for starting an ITIN program?
Just do it. Take the plunge.
get buy-in from the top down. And I mean, you know, you got to have your executive team, your board, your supervisory committee. You got to get your staff on board. If anyone's rowing in the opposite direction, it undercuts everything. So
I will say that when we started ours, we started it with training on the culture. I mean, we went in and trained the people that are approving the loans to understand why they're looking at so many different documents. And I think that's really that's an important part. It's more than just pushing paper to get it through. You need to understand the culture and why things are being done the way they are.
All right, and there's something interesting here. The question is any one of you offering ITIN citizenship loans? And I think that is interesting to clarify. If anybody would like to clarify what happens with citizenship loans versus ITIN.
Well, I can jump in here. So if someone is applying for a citizenship loan, it means that they already are a green card holder. So basically they're going through the naturalization process, right? So those people will have the documentation. They already legally residents. That's the only way that you can go through that process. Or you could be a refugee that is, you know, going through that process as well. So it's a very different type of loan. Happy to provide more information. Two more things. To Roberta's point about making sure that you understand the culture, that's very important. We've done a couple of studies around that. And I guess, Renee, once we send this recording to the group, let's add some of those studies as resources. Also, I'm going to remind people about that ITIN Lending guide that was produced by Filene, Coopera, PolicyWorks, and Inclusiv a few years ago. It's a great resource. But again, we're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. This is just about using what you already have in place.
Excellent. All right, so having pretty much fielded all of the questions, I guess this is it. Is there anything else that our panelists would like to add before we finish the webinar?
I think that if the credit unions that are considering doing this, you are going to be so surprised of the world that you're going to open up. Just the referrals that you're getting. You've got one family into a home, you've got all their compadres coming right after them. So it's just a smart business move.
All right, any other comments before we close?
Thank you.
We have 20 years doing this. After 20 years, we cannot be mistaken, right? So the growing that we are having in the last years demonstrates that this is a very successful strategy. So just do it.
Yeah.
What they said.
This is the moment. We may have comprehensive immigration reform at some point in this country, and we have to be ready for that. Yes, fingers crossed. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your insights in this incredible topic. Thanks everyone who participated. Great questions. We could go on for another couple of hours easily, but wanted to thank everyone for their interest. And now let's go do this, right? Sí se puede.
Claro que sí.
Y se puedes. Juntos avanzamos.
Eso. Juntos avanzamos. Muchas gracias.
All right,
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.